All right, setting the record straight on this. Pro Tools is the industry standard. A clapback. Let's deal with it. Welcome to the Music Pro, where we offer professional recording objectives to help you conduct your best music business. I'm Shea Alexander Wright, and we're going to get into this whole Pro Tools being the music industry standard. I'm clapping back at Bolo Da Producer. Bolo, this is not a diss at you at all. I'm a fan. I love watching all your stuff, man. I'm an MPC user myself. But yeah, this Pro Tools business being the industry standard, it is. Let me take you guys back real quick. First, I'm going to establish why Pro Tools is the industry standard and how that happened. What Pro Tools did, what Digidesign, back in the day before Avid bought it, Pro Tools was developed and distributed by a company called Digidesign. What Digidesign did very effectively at the turn of the century, so this is, between 98 and the year 2000, what they did very effectively and successfully is they went into the commercial studios and sold Pro Tools as a system. And that's how it became the industry standard. If you were going to go into all of these large format commercial studios, your Hit Factories, your Criterions, your Soundtracks, your Cutting Rooms, your Westlakes, Capitol Records, on and on and on. Ocean Way at the time, whatever it is. If you're gonna go into these rooms and you're gonna record hard disk, there had to be a standard format across the board. Just like the standard format was 2-inch tape. And then coming right after 2-inch tape was the 1-inch digital tape, which we'll get into. The digital revolution had already happened by the time Pro Tools came on the scene. It just wasn't hard disk recording. It was just digital tape. It's a whole other thing. But that digital revolution was already underway, which is how we ended up getting ADATs and DA88s, recording multi-track audio on video cassettes, which is just a fucking bananas idea, but that's an event for another time. So essentially, what Digidesign did was they sold this system to all the commercial studios on the premise that in order for you to effectively and efficiently record serious music on hard disk with a computer, you needed a system that was going to support it. And what Pro Tools did was it offered DSP, core DSP, to do all of the audio processing and handling so that the computer wouldn't have to do all of that processing and handling. We all know that the majority, at that time, the majority of the studios had Mac computers, had Macintosh. And the big thing about Apple and Macintosh at that time was they weren't very reliable computers at all. Mac was not stable. During the 90s, going into the 2000s, I can't recall a single session that I did with a Mac that didn't crash. And we're not even talking about recording hard disk on it. We're talking about just MIDI sequencing with programs like Studio Vision and Performer and all that stuff. So if the Mac couldn't handle just simple MIDI sequencing, there's no way it could have handled hard disk recording, hard disk audio recording. So Digidesign offered that, a system that was separate from the computer. It had its own computer processing in it, referred to often as DSP, and that DSP, that core system, would handle all of the audio processing. But also the thing was to get the sound into the computer properly, you needed a very high-end conversion system. And so they offered that. At the time that I saw the hard disk recording transition happen, particularly with Pro Tools, Pro Tools was essentially session 8. So there's 8 tracks of audio that you could record in a single session. And then, by 1999, it had evolved into the mix system. Mix 24 was the big thing. So that's really what it was. And then beyond that, Digidesign was able to effectively bring in all the educational facilities to get on board. I think one thing that they did very smartly was to do the whole Digi001 system and then the M-Audio stuff, M-Box. Basically what it did was, at a lower price point, it got people introduced into the whole Pro Tools ecosystem. And which the foundation of that is the software, is Pro Tools itself. So if kids are learning at their schools, music schools, recording schools, on these pared down systems like Digi001 and Digi002 and so on and so forth, or even in their home setups with an M-Box setup, then they're already familiar with Pro Tools, the software, the workstation. So that's really what happened. That's really how Pro Tools ended up becoming the industry standard. At the time, I was in a partnership with the studio in Brooklyn. We did not run Pro Tools primarily out of our rooms. We ran Cubase. In '98, I got turned on to Cubase VST by one of my best friends, Jarvis Blackshear, who is a brilliant engineer in Atlanta. He's done a lot of organized noise stuff that includes the Outcast. And in '98, he hipped me and my brother to Cubase VST because he knew we were already hot on what Cakewalk was doing at the time, where you could actually record audio into the sequencer. It was slow, it was wonky, but you could do it. And then so taking that to my studio partnership in New York, the Pro Tools conversation was always on the table because it was all about the timing. When will it be a good time for us to actually transition to making Pro Tools our main workstation? And it turned out that that time never came, at least, not before I left the partnership. Is Pro Tools, has it ever been the best piece of software to use? No, never. It sounded shitty from the beginning, which to me made perfect sense, because if Digidesign was selling it as the recorder to all these commercial facilities, well, you need something that, a sound engine that doesn't really have any color to it, in order to get the most out of these large format consoles and all of the gear that you use with it. To me, as an engineer, the software was always a bit wonky. Because I am a producer, I am creative, I've always used the studio as an extension of my creativity. So, almost playing everything in the studio like an instrument, like that was my approach. And that's still my approach to recording music, is it's an extension of my creativity. So there were a lot of things about the Pro Tools software that didn't make sense to me, because it went against the grain of my creative workflow. There were one or two steps to do certain things in order to cater to my creativity, and I didn't like that. What's happening, I've done sessions all over the place, as I've mentioned in other videos, and I'm showing some pictures right now of me in studios like Westlake, Westlake CND, I have pictures. There's so many pictures that I don't have any longer of me in facilities on both coasts. Man, I wish I had some of those pictures still from those East Coast studios. But I do have a couple of shots of me even recently doing a session at the Power Station in New York. And, you know, Pro Tools is the standard. I wanted to make the most of my time with the artist. Actually, Virian, we did the final lead vocals to her song 1492 at the Power Station. And in order for me to make that session super efficient, I had to put everything on Pro Tools, to fly everything into Pro Tools. And so that when I walked in the studio there, all I had to do was fly the session into their computer, and voila, we were in business. And I had the outputs and everything all set up and you know, the whole shebang. You can't do that. If I were, you know, just strictly working on Nuendo or Cubase like I do, I wouldn't have been able to have an efficient session that way. When I'm here in LA and I go to Westlake, or I go to Clear Lake, or any other large format facility here, I'm prepping the sessions on Pro Tools. And then when I walk out of there, it's coming out on Pro Tools. And then I have to sit in my room here or in my brother's room in the Valley to, you know, fly things back into Nuendo or Cubase or whatnot. That's just the way it is. You know, you can go anywhere in the world and record in a large format studio, and it's gonna be Pro Tools. But still, you know, the industry standard is whatever is supported by the facilities that are supported ultimately by the record business. And the record business is a business. It is a real sector separate from everything else. But I wanted to throw my 50 cents worth in to what Bolo was bringing to the table on it. And I respect his observation and his experience, how he saw Pro Tools come on the rise, especially being down in Atlanta. At that time, between the late 90s or all of the 90s and the early 2000s, I spent a lot of time going back and forth between the Northeast and Atlanta, because I'm originally from Atlanta, but there are a couple of projects that, you know, I was always pulled into or having to deal with out of Atlanta. And because of that, Pro Tools was still the thing, you know. My buddy Jarvis, who I mentioned, he and his old studio partner, Cal Funny, they had 1210 studios. And Jarvis was also doing heavy work over at Patchwork. So Pro Tools had to be in place at 1210 studios in order to keep running things back and forth between there and Patchwork. My brother and I have had this kind of joke between us for the last 20 years, that Pro Tools is a necessary evil in our systems, in our studio. So anyway, that's my take on it. If you guys have any more to say about it, please leave it in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, I'm Shay Alexander Wright. Thanks for dropping in.